And welcome back to today's episode of As the Brazos Falls. And we're going to kick it over to Pat, because Pat, our resident historian, brought up some interesting facts, or at least I think they're interesting facts, and I think TK thinks they're interesting facts during the course of the break. So, Pat.
I agree. So Stacey Ann's long and interesting life. There are several accounts that I found where she kept her head covered for the rest of her life to hide the scars. Although ironically, we have found a picture of her. She was not scalped and did not visibly in the picture have scars on her head. So
on her face, yes, and her hands.
Definitely her face,
She had
visible
hair.
in the pictures. But she had hair.
Yeah.
So TK, you had mentioned that you had heard some tales about people taking their children to see the scalped lady.
Yeah, and they would say that she was scalped and that's why she kept her head covered. But, like Pat said in the picture we just saw, it shows that she has a full head of hair, but she does have a lot of scars on her face. There's lots of different things like that, like how we talked about the survivors. I thought there were only 2 survivors. You've heard 4 survivors.
Up to five,
Okay.
actually. Yeah, a lot of inconsistencies.
And then Adeline, I heard that she died. Her head was on a spike and scalped with her body severed. And that's what Isaac walked into first. He didn't even know it was her because of the way her body was left.
So brutally disfigured.
Yeah, but then you heard that she survived.
I did, but I think, TK, that your account is more prevalent in the historical record than the account that she lived. So...
And the ages vary.
And the ages vary a lot.
Yeah.
Poor Isaac could have been anywhere between 10 and 19, apparently, which is confusing.
Yeah, and he never really told his part, or it's not documented, about his version of things, but I did see that he went off to fight the Civil War, died, and no one knows where his grave was or where he was killed.
These poor families had hard existences. Even the ones that survived had a rough life going forward for a very long time.
Yeah, no thanks.
So much for frontierism.
Yeah. So that is just... The Marlin Family Massacre is just one tale that we're diving into, and we figured it was best to start with that. Nick knows a little bit more about the history around Marlin, but of course Pat and I are really interested in it and love finding out little weird tales from different people. So, like Nick said, Pat is more of the historian. I'm going to be talking to people on the streets and find out, like, their versions of it. And
I'm just here for the ride.
And in charge of all things tech.
But also there are times where we're going to get into ghost stories. Nick does paranormal. What do you guys call it at the Palace? Is it?
We do an event called Paranormal University. And what that is, we teach anybody, novice investigators, sometimes more professional investigators that have been doing it for a while. We'll come in and we'll teach ethics in investigating. We'll teach how to properly use the scientific instruments behind investigating. It's not at all like what you see on television. It's a lot more like fishing. You kind of go and you set the bait and you see if anything nibbles. And
y'all are all about debunking more than anything
else. And a big part of my excitement in this podcast is getting into the historical facts of things. History plays a huge part in what people perceive as hauntings and spiritual activity. So that's my whole part of this, is wanting to get the history behind things. And when we do start talking more about the paranormal and events like mass graves and haunted buildings and haunted legend and haunted lore and haunted this and that, I want to know more of the history and see if we can get down to some of the brass tacks of what local legend has claimed over the hundreds and hundreds of years of its existence.
So, Nick, if we can find the actual location, because that is also point of contention in this story. If we can find the location, will you come scope it out for us?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
We might have to have a mini-sode of that, like at night or something like that. Just a live recording as like a bonus feature or something.
Well, yeah,
That
I
would be
mean,
nice.
you can't really get the feel of something unless you actually go there.
Mm-hmm. But then the thing is like we have to definitely try to find where it really was, because there's mixed information about that too.
You might have some inroads, TK. You're pretty well connected.
Yeah, and I also do think it would make sense to have a burial ground around the falls. Like, the park, Brazos, the falls on the Brazos.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the energy there, I could totally see that.
I can see that.
There's a campground there now, and it's actually a state park, but it's super tiny. I mean, I don't even know, 5 acres or...
Yeah, it's
10 acres. It's small.
If that.
Yeah.
But bodies being buried or even deposed of at the river and so forth is not anything new to this area. And I think later on down the line, when we get into episodes involving certain well-known serial killers from around this region, we'll get into some of those supposed areas where those bodies were dumped. So I think one that's coming to mind off the top of my head is the famous Kenneth Allen McDuff.
Oh yeah, that's a crazy story.
A lot of people in this area have probably heard of. So we'll get into more of that later. I do want to circle back around to one point that you brought up when we came back from break. You mentioned the covering that she wore on her head after the events, and it makes me think of the psychological aspects of things. Was the attack so traumatizing to her that she felt like she had to cover her head to protect it for the rest of her life?
That's a very interesting viewpoint there. I can only imagine that as a young girl being attacked so viciously and seeing multiple family members murdered in front of you, you are traumatized, and you carry that with you for the rest of your life in one way or another.
Well, it could have also been out of respect for the ones that have passed or something. You really never know, especially in her telling her version of things, which people think her version was a little twisted up because it was later in life. It would have been cool for her to give a little information on why.
Yeah, and anybody that wants to reach out with any information or any stories that you may have even heard, please feel free. I think the plan is for us to develop a Facebook page for the podcast, and there is where we can do things like post this picture that we found of this. Remind me of her name again?
Stacy Ann Morgan.
Stacy Ann Morgan. We can definitely post that picture there. We can post any pictures or anything that comes our way. You'll be able to direct message us through that Facebook page once we get it up and running. And also don't hesitate to email me directly with things that I can then put onto the Facebook page. And I'll just go ahead and give you that email right now. It's nick.landy@yahoo.com. So feel free to email me there, and again, direct message us through that Facebook page. TK, this whole podcast idea was yours.
Yeah.
And I want to just ask you real quick. You've been here for, you said, 5-6 years, something around there. What made you want to dive into this whole world of podcasting and getting into these historical stories?
Well, mostly when I started volunteering at the Palace, I started meeting more people from Marlin, and there's mixed ages. I also joined the garden club in Marlin, and that's primarily older women, but they would tell me all these crazy stories from around this area, and I'm inquisitive. I'm always asking questions. I want to know. So just as the years pass, I'm learning more and more about this area, and I love podcasts, and I like history and friends, so it just kind of came together.
Yeah, awesome. And Pat, what got you into history? You will sit there and you'll do the research, and you'll email and send out text messages and this and that and the other, and you'll go to every resource that you can find. And what got the ball rolling with you for that?
I've been a history junkie since I was a child. So when TK brought this up, I was immediately fascinated and thought, oh, I can geek out and start researching some stuff. Ironically, when you just Google Marlin, Texas, to be such a small town, massacres are frequent around here. Yeah. There were numerous hits. I had to do some real digging to get to this massacre incidents because there were several.
Lots of murder around.
Lots of murder, lots of suspicious suicides.
And you're talking about from like teachers to artists to wealthy families to poor people to the unknown.
Throw a
body
little public
showing up.
corruption in there.
Yeah.
And Marlin is a very interesting place.
Most definitely.
Definitely. And not just Marlin, but pretty much anywhere that encompasses Falls County. And, of course, Marlin being the seat of that county. I believe that's where most of that comes from. But, yeah, we definitely have a lot to dive into. We have a lot more interesting things coming up in future episodes. But for now, I think we're going to call it a day. Thank you for listening to the first episode. And TK, Pat, and I will bid you adieu. Tune in again next time.
One thing real quick, we want to say thanks for the information from the Frontier Times Magazine.
Frontier Times Magazine,
Absolutely.
The Marlin Chamber of Commerce, UTA has done some really interesting research on this topic, as have numerous genealogical sites written by descendants of family members.
And I got some information from the librarian in Marlin and just the word on the streets throughout the community.
Yeah, and folks, we will try our best to get these sources of information out there, whether it be verbally on the podcast or through the Facebook page. We will cite these sources for you so that you can go and investigate them yourselves. So,
sounds good.
All right. Y'all tune in again next time.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.